Hi everyone and welcome back to the podcast. It's just me today and I wanted to talk about a topic that I actually got an Instagram message about. And it's a topic that often goes misunderstood, overlooked and often invalidated. And that is atypical anorexia. Maybe you have heard this term but aren't quite sure what it means. Maybe you or someone you know has been told, but you don't look like you've got anorexia. You're not thin enough to have an eating disorder. Or maybe you've even struggled with the belief that you don't deserve help or recovery because you don't fit the stereotypical image of someone with anorexia. So let's break this down together because I want to clear up some misconceptions and remind you, wherever you are in your journey, that your struggles are real and valid. Your pain is real and you do absolutely deserve support. So let's start by breaking down what atypical anorexia actually is. The term atypical anorexia is defined in the DSM-5, which is the diagnostic manual used by mental health professionals. According to this definition, atypical anorexia meets all of the criteria for anorexia nervosa, except for one thing. The individual is not underweight. And this is underweight by BMI standards. So instead of being underweight by BMI standards, their body weight may be classified as normal, overweight, or even obese, according to traditional metrics like BMI, which, as you all know, is absolute load of bullshit, misunderstood information. So many of you are probably familiar with the harmful role BMI has played in the way we think about health and bodies. It is an outdated and highly flawed system that doesn't take into account things like muscle mass, genetics, or actually health. Yet it's often used for diagnosing eating disorders, which means people with atypical anorexia are far more likely to go unnoticed or be dismissed by medical professionals. But let's look at why atypical anorexia is actually just as severe as anorexia nervosa. When someone restricts food, regardless of their body size, it triggers a cascade of changes in the body. The body perceives this restriction as a threat to survival, activating what's known as the starvation response. This is a biological mechanism designed to keep us alive during times of famine, and it kicks in whatever weight you're at. So here's what happens during this process. The metabolism slows. To conserve energy, the body reduces the metabolic rate, which means you can feel cold, tired, generally sluggish. Restriction disrupts hormones like leptin and ghrelin, which regulate hunger and fullness cues. It also suppresses reproductive hormones, leading to issues like missed periods or infertility. Your brain, which relies heavily on glucose for fuel, becomes impaired, which can lead to brain fog, obsessive thinking about food, and difficulty concentrating. Prolonged restriction can weaken the heart muscle, leading to bradycardia, which is a dangerously slow heart rate, or even cardiac arrest in some cases. Chronic restriction increases cortisol levels, which is the body's primary stress hormone, which exacerbates anxiety, depression, and a sense of just feeling on edge all the time. So while someone with atypical anorexia might not have the physical appearance that society often associates with anorexia, their body is experiencing the same life-threatening changes. And it's really important to remember that the damage caused by restriction does not depend on your weight. It depends on your behaviours. So if we challenge the misconception that anorexia is solely a thin person's illness, research has shown that people with atypical anorexia often experience higher levels of medical and psychological distress than those with anorexia nervosa. One study published in the Journal of Adolescent Health found that people with atypical anorexia had similar or more severe physical complications. These included electrolyte imbalances, heart rate abnormalities, and bone density loss. But what's more concerning is that people with atypical anorexia often suffer in silence for far longer because their symptoms just aren't taken seriously. Doctors often focus on weight and even praise them for their restrictions, saying things like, "Oh, well done for losing weight, just keep going," which of course reinforces the eating disorder behaviours and delays proper treatment. Atypical anorexia is undiagnosed across the board, but particularly in people who don't fit the stereotypical image of someone with an eating disorder. This includes people in larger bodies, men, older adults, people from ethnic minority backgrounds, and the LGBTQ+ community. And this brings me to the most important point I want you to take away. Atypical anorexia is not less than or milder than anorexia nervosa. It is a serious, life-threatening mental and physical illness that deserves immediate attention, care, and recovery support. When we understand the science behind atypical anorexia, we can begin to break down those harmful stereotypes and acknowledge that eating disorders don't actually discriminate. They're not defined by your weight or appearance. They're defined by the behaviours, the thoughts, and the impact they have on your health and quality of life. So let's look at how these stereotypes cause harm, not just to individual people, but to the way society as a whole views eating disorders. So there is this misconception that anorexia and eating disorders in general only happen to people who are very, very thin. And this stereotype doesn't just misrepresent the reality of eating disorders, it actively causes harm to the people that don't fit in that mould. And I think from memory, less than 6% of people with an eating disorder are in one of these very, very thin bodies. And one of the biggest consequences of this stereotype is that people with atypical anorexia often face delayed diagnosis and treatment, or worse, no diagnosis at all. Imagine this, you finally work up the courage to tell your doctor about your struggles with food and body image. You're restricting, obsessing over your weight, maybe having physical symptoms like dizziness and exhaustion. But instead of receiving the validation and help that you need, your concerns are just brushed aside with comments like, "Well, your weight is fine, just eat healthier. You can't have an eating disorder, you're not underweight." And this is the reality for so many people with atypical anorexia. Medical professionals are often trained to focus on weight as the primary indicator of an eating disorder, and they can fail to recognise the seriousness of the behaviours and their impact. And as a result, people might not receive the life-saving treatment they need until their health deteriorates really, really far. But the damage isn't just physical, it's emotional too. Being dismissed and invalidated by somebody in a position of authority makes you feel like your struggles aren't real, that you're not sick enough to deserve help. But eating disorders don't wait for you to fit a certain size before they wreak havoc on your body and your mind. So let's move from the external validation to what happens internally. These stereotypes about eating disorders create internalized stigma, which makes you question the validity of your own struggles. It's common to think, well, I can't have an eating disorder because I'm not thin enough. I'm not as sick as other people, so I don't deserve help. I'll only take my eating disorder seriously once I lose more weight. And these thoughts aren't just self-critical, they're actually really dangerous. They perpetuate the belief that your body defines the severity of the illness, which can keep you stuck in these harmful behaviours and trying to prove that you're unwell enough to get help. And what's really heartbreaking is that eating disorders thrive in this kind of environment. They feed off those feelings of unworthiness, pushing you further into restriction, over-exercise and other harmful behaviours, all in the pursuit of external validation or a feeling of control. And unfortunately, these harmful stereotypes don't just come from doctors or from self-perception. They're constantly reinforced by society and the media. Think about how eating disorders are portrayed in films, TV shows, and even awareness campaigns. The imagery is so often a thin, young, white woman. And while this image might reflect the experience of some people, it erases the reality that eating disorders don't discriminate. They affect people of all sizes, ages, genders, race, and socio-economic backgrounds. And this narrow portrayal alienates those who don't fit in the stereotype, making them feel invisible or unworthy of support. Perpetuates the belief that weight is the most important marker of an eating disorder, rather than behaviours, beliefs, and mental health struggles that underpin it. And let's not forget the harmful messaging around weight in general. Our culture glorifies weight loss, even when it's achieved through unhealthy or disordered behaviours. For someone with atypical anorexia, this can be really confusing. They might receive praise for losing weight while simultaneously feeling trapped in an illness that's destroying their health. And this societal reinforcement can delay recovery because it totally validates the eating disorder. So let's talk about the people who are most affected by these stereotypes. While eating disorders don't discriminate, the way they're diagnosed and treated often does. People in bigger bodies are particularly at risk of being overlooked. Their restriction might be praised as discipline, and health issues might be attributed to their weight rather than the eating disorder behaviours. Men are often dismissed because of the false belief that eating disorders are a woman's illness. And this not only delays their diagnosis, but makes it so much harder for them to reach out for help in the first place. Older people often face similar stigma. Society wrongly assumes that eating disorders only affect teenagers or young adults, which leads to missed opportunities for diagnosis and support. People of colour and the LGBTQ+ individuals are also less likely to receive a diagnosis or treatment, often because of systemic biases and a lack of awareness about how eating disorders present in diverse communities. And all these groups are already underrepresented in the eating disorder research and media portrayals, which means that their voices are often missing from the conversation. It's so important that we all broaden our understanding of what eating disorders look like. And the truth is, they don't have a look. And let's get better representation and support for everyone. And let's talk about the emotional toll these stereotypes take. Feeling invisible or invalidated leads to deep feelings of shame, isolation, hopelessness. You might feel like you're screaming into a void, just desperately wanting someone to understand what you're going through. You're not alone. Your experiences are real, they are valid, and you do deserve help and attention. Breaking free from the stereotypes starts with recognizing that you don't have to meet anybody else's definition of sick enough to reach out for help. Recovery isn't about proving your illness. It's about acknowledging your pain and choosing to heal, no matter what anyone else thinks. So before I move on to how to move forward and challenge these stereotypes, I just want to remind you that the eating disorder is not invalid just because your body doesn't fit a stereotype. Your struggles are real, and so is your right to recovery. So let's take the focus away from weight to what truly matters: your health, your happiness, and your freedom. So now that we've talked about the stereotypes surrounding atypical anorexia, let's look deeper into its impact on both the body and the mind. It's crucial to recognise that atypical anorexia is not milder or less dangerous than anorexia nervosa. The behaviours and consequences are just as serious and life-altering. When we think of the physical consequences of eating disorders, people often assume these only happen to people of a very low body weight. But the reality is your body responds to restriction, malnutrition and over-exercise regardless of your weight and size. So let's have a look at what this means in scientific terms. The starvation response and metabolic changes. When your body doesn't receive enough fuel, whether through food restriction or over-exercise, it enters a state of starvation response. This survival mechanism evolved to help us endure times of famine, but in the context of an eating disorder, it can wreak havoc on your body. Your body reduces your metabolic rate to conserve energy. This is why people with atypical anorexia often feel cold, tired, and struggle with low energy levels. Prolonged calorie restriction lowers your resting energy expenditure, which makes your body operate at a much slower pace. And your body breaks down muscle tissue, including the heart muscle, to use as fuel, which can lead to serious cardiovascular issues and even heart failure. And these risks are independent of weight, and they can occur in anyone engaging in prolonged restriction. And the restriction of food and nutrients leads to significant hormonal imbalances. Leptin and ghrelin, the hormones which regulate hunger and fullness, become dysregulated, which means your body might not send the correct signals, leaving you either feeling constantly hungry or suppressing hunger entirely. Restriction also increases levels of cortisol, which is your body's primary stress hormone, which over time can lead to weakened immunity, digestive problems, and chronic fatigue. In both men and women, restriction suppresses reproductive hormones. Women may experience irregular or missing periods, while men see a drop in testosterone levels, leading to low libido and fertility issues. Bone density loss, osteopenia, and osteoporosis is a major consequence of atypical anorexia, even in people who appear to have a normal body weight. When your body is malnourished, it pulls calcium from your bones to maintain essential functions, which leaves them brittle and prone to fractures. And bone density loss is just as prevalent in people with atypical anorexia as it is in those with anorexia nervosa. Your digestive system slows down with prolonged restriction. Gastroparesis is a condition where your stomach empties more slowly, and it's really common in people with eating disorders. And it leads to bloating, nausea, early fullness, which makes it harder to eat enough even when you're trying to recover. There's also constipation, which is a direct result of the reduced food intake. Cardiovascular risks, as I mentioned before. And then there's the emotional tolls. The obsessively thinking about food. And people with atypical anorexia experience intense preoccupation with food, weight, and body image. And this isn't just a matter of thinking about food a lot. It can dominate every waking moment. When your brain is deprived of energy, it becomes hyper-focused on food as a part of the survival mechanism. And there's actually several scientific studies that have demonstrated this. One of the most famous is the Minnesota starvation experiment conducted during World War II. In this study, where healthy men were put on a semi-starvation diet, despite being at a normal weight, they developed obsessive behaviours around food, hoarded recipes, and displayed intense anxiety. And this study highlights that it's the behaviour of restriction, not your weight, that triggers these psychological symptoms. The emotional toll of atypical anorexia is often compounded by shame and self-blame. People frequently feel like they don't deserve support or aren't sick enough to seek help, which creates a vicious circle. Restriction leads to feelings of control or validation. These feelings reinforce the eating disorder behaviours. This internal conflict is exhausting and can contribute to feelings of isolation, anxiety, and depression. And eating disorders thrive in secrecy, and atypical anorexia is no exception. Many people isolate themselves to avoid social situations involving food, fearing judgment or feeling less than because their body doesn't fit the stereotypical narrative of an eating disorder. Atypical anorexia often goes hand in hand with perfectionism as well. People may feel like they have to achieve an impossible standard in every aspect of their lives, and this pressure becomes unbearable. When you add that to a deep sense of unworthiness, the emotional toll becomes overwhelming. It's like carrying a weight that gets heavier every day, with no relief in sight. The good news is that the brain and body are remarkably resilient, and when you begin to nourish yourself consistently, many of these physical and emotional effects begin to reverse. This is neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to rewire itself. Means that these obsessive thought patterns created by starvation can gradually fade as your brain receives adequate fuel. But this does take time. Just as the eating disorder doesn't develop overnight, recovery requires patience, support, and willingness to challenge those beliefs. So we've looked at what atypical anorexia is, the harm caused by stereotypes, and the toll it takes on your body and mind. So let's look at moving forward, because I really truly believe that recovery is possible for everyone, no matter where you're starting from or what your body looks like. The first and most important mindset take away that last sentence. The first and most important mindset shift to make in recovery is understanding that it's not about weight. It's about behaviours, thought, and your relationship with food and your body. It can be tempting to focus on the physical aspects of recovery, gaining weight, reaching a normal BMI, or changing how your body looks. But the truth is, healing from atypical anorexia means addressing the restrictive behaviours, the obsessive thoughts, and the underlying beliefs that drive them. Are you eating enough to nourish your body and brain? Are you challenging the fears that keep you trapped in restriction? Are you giving yourself unconditional permission to eat? Recovery isn't about reaching any form of target weight. It's about finding peace with yourself, food, and your body, no matter what size or shape you're in. One of the hardest but most important steps in recovery is learning to trust your body again. When you've been restricting or ignoring your hunger cues for a long time, it's easy to feel really disconnected from your body and from your body's natural signals. But trust me, your body knows what it needs to heal. You just have to listen and give it the chance. So, practical ways to rebuild trust with your body is eat consistently. Even when you don't feel hungry, aim to eat every 2 to 3 hours. This helps your body feel safe and learn that food is always available and that it doesn't need to be in survival mode. Challenge food rules. Make a list of fear foods and begin reintroducing them one at a time. Remind yourself that all foods have value and are safe to eat. If you have hunger signals, listen to them. And this might feel scary at first, especially if they feel overwhelming. But hunger is a sign that your body is repairing itself. Honour it. Over time, consistent nourishment helps regulate those hormones like leptin and ghrelin, which control the hunger and fullness. And over time, these signals become clearer and your body learns to trust that food is always available. The eating disorder voice, thrives on fear, shame, and control. This is the voice that tells you you're not sick enough, not deserving enough, that you need to hold on to restriction to stay in control. But to recover, you need to actively challenge this voice every single day. So separate yourself from the voice. Give it a name. Visualize it as a separate entity. It's not you. And this makes it easier to recognize when it's speaking and remind yourself that it's not you. Replace those negative thoughts with affirmations. When the eating disorder says, you don't need to eat that, counter it with, my body deserves nourishment. Remind yourself of the facts. Write down the physical and emotional toll the eating disorder has taken on you. And when that voice tries to pull you back into restriction, use the list as a reminder of why you're choosing recovery. Atypical anorexia isn't just about food. It's often rooted in deeper emotional pain or unmet needs. To truly recover, you need to address the beliefs and feelings that drive the disorder. Is there perfectionism? Are you holding yourself to impossible standards? Human beings are not perfect. Keep reminding yourself of that. Does restriction give you a false sense of control in a chaotic world? Explore other ways to feel grounded. Journal, meditate, connect with supportive people. Do you feel like you don't deserve food, care, rest? This is a belief that you can unlearn by practicing self-compassion and treating yourself as you would somebody that you love. Recovery is hard and you don't have to do it on your own. Building a strong support system can make a huge difference. Reach out to people who care about you. Share your struggles with friends or family members. Work with professionals, coaches, dietitians, therapists. Join a local recovery community, whether it's in person or online. Recovery doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, I don't think it ever is, ever. I've never heard of a perfect recovery. Mine was very messy. But you don't have to do it all by yourself. It's okay to lean on others. Celebrate non-weight victories. Take your focus away from weight and onto the positive changes that happen in your life. And celebrate all of them. The more we celebrate every win, the quicker our brain rewires because it feels good for doing the wins. And commit to rest, and replenishment. Your body and mind are in recovery, which means they need plenty of rest to heal. This isn't just physical rest, but also emotional rest. Give yourself permission to slow down, take breaks, prioritize self-care. Reclaiming your recovery is about taking your life back from the eating disorder, choosing nourishment over restriction, self-compassion over criticism, freedom over fear. It's messy, imperfect, and very challenging. But every time you choose to honour your hunger, challenge a fear, look after you, you're sending a powerful message to yourself. You are telling yourself, I'm worth it, I deserve this. As we bring this episode to a close, I want to speak to you directly, the person listening right now who may be struggling, doubting themselves, or feeling unsure about whether recovery is possible. Are you caught in the cycle of thinking, I'm not sick enough, I don't deserve recovery? Okay, if this resonates, I want you to take a deep breath and hear me when I say, you are enough. You are worthy. You deserve a life filled with self-acceptance, self-compassion, and self-love. Self-acceptance is one of the most powerful tools in recovery. And it is tough to get there. And so many people spend years, decades, trying to fight our bodies, striving for perfection, chasing this ideal of, I'll be happy when, and the eating disorder will never make you happy. Peace doesn't come from changing your body. It comes from accepting it. Self-acceptance doesn't mean you have to love everything about your body or yourself. It's okay to feel uncomfortable, frustrated at times. What it means is choosing to meet yourself where you are without judgment. It means saying, this is me. That's okay. Recovery starts with small acts of self-acceptance. Allowing yourself to eat when you're hungry, even when the eating disorder voice is telling you not to. Showing up for yourself even when it feels hard. And starting to recognize your worth has never been tied to your body size, your weight, or your appearance. And self-compassion is the tool that will carry you through the hardest days. When recovery is, as it always is, messy, uncomfortable, and filled with moments where you're unsure and you think you might have taken a step backwards, that's okay. It's part of the process. And self-compassion is about treating yourself with that same kindness and understanding you'd offer to a friend or a loved one. Think about it. If a friend came to you and said they were struggling, would you criticize them? Would you say you're not trying hard enough? No, of course not. You'd encourage them, remind them of their worth and offer support. Why should it be any different for you? The next time you catch yourself being critical or harsh, pause and say, what would I say to someone I care about in this situation? How can I show myself the same understanding and patience? Recovery is not about being perfect. It's about being human. And being human means giving yourself permission to make mistakes, to struggle, and to keep going anyway. Now let's talk about self-love. And this might feel like a big unattainable goal right now, especially if you're used to criticizing yourself or feeling unworthy. But self-love isn't about waking up one day and suddenly feeling amazing about yourself. It's about choosing to care for yourself, even when it feels hard. Self-love looks like nourishing your body because you know it deserves to be cared for. Resting when you're tired because your worth isn't tied to productivity. Setting boundaries with people or situations that drain your energy because you deserve peace. Speaking to yourself kindly and gently, even when the eating disorder voice tries to pull you down. And self-love is a practice, it's not a destination. You build it in small amounts of showing up for yourself over and over again. And those moments add up. They add up to a life where you feel free, empowered, and whole. Now, I know that learning self-acceptance, self-compassion, and self-love isn't easy, especially when the eating disorder voice is loud and the road to recovery feels uncertain. And that's where coaching comes in. When you work with me, we don't just focus on the mechanics of recovery. We focus on healing your relationship with yourself. Together, we unpack the beliefs and fears that hold you back. Create a recovery plan that helps you nourish not just your body, but your mind and your spirit. And start building a foundation of self-acceptance, self-compassion, and self-love that empowers you to reclaim your life. Coaching is a partnership and a space where you can be honest, vulnerable, and fully seen without judgment. My role is to support you, challenge you, and remind you of your strength at any moments that you feel like giving up. If this episode resonated with you, if you feel a spark of hope, or you're ready to explore what recovery would look like for you, I'd love to hear from you. You don't need to have all the answers or even know exactly what you need. Just reaching out is a powerful act of self-compassion. Recovery isn't about becoming someone new. It's about coming home to yourself, learning to accept yourself and love and care for the person you've always been beneath the eating disorder. I believe in you, even if you're not ready to believe in yourself yet. And I want to remind you, you are not the eating disorder. You are a whole, worthy and beautiful person who deserves to live a life free from the chains of restriction and self-doubt. So take that first step. You don't have to do it alone. I'm here to walk alongside you, and I'm sending you so much love and compassion. Until next time, take care of yourself. You are so worth it.